Okay. Let's be honest for a second here. How often do you look at the news, the headlines, the sudden political scandals, the random military buildups, and feel like you're just watching a theater production?
Yeah, like you're seeing the shiny surface.
Exactly. The press releases, the confident handshakes.
Hmm.
But you just know, deep down, that the scaffolding underneath all of that is rusty. Or honestly, maybe entirely missing.
It's that gnawing feeling that the institutions we rely on are, well, they're becoming hollowed out, that we're staring at a facade and the paint is really starting to peel.
Right. And today, we are going to tear down that facade. We are taking a deep dive into a really fascinating and frankly slightly terrifying discussion from the Dutch platform, The New World, The New World.
It's a great source.
It really is. And the mission for this deep dive is to connect some dots that might seem, at first glance, totally unrelated. We're going to look at the long-term cultural and philosophical lines, not just the daily ticker tape at the bottom of your screen.
Because we have a lot of ground to cover today. We're talking about a domestic political implosion in the Netherlands involving a fake CV, which sounds small.
It sounds like local news.
Right, but it is actually a symptom of a massive structural rot. And then we're looking at a radical New Gentlemen's movement in the UK that makes Brexit look like a polite tea party.
Yeah.
And finally, we're looking at a looming technological shift in the Middle East that could literally make the American military machine obsolete overnight.
It sounds like the plot of a thriller novel, but this is the reality we're living in right now. The source material basically argues that we are witnessing a triple crisis: a crisis of competence, a crisis of security, and a crisis of global power.
And central to all of this, the thread tying it together, is this concept of the bullshit economy.
The bullshit economy. Let's unpack that.
Yeah, it's the idea that we have built systems, political, corporate, military systems that prioritize image, branding, and checking boxes over actual tangible reality. But as we're going to see today, when reality finally comes knocking.
Whether that's a Russian missile or a collapsing social contract.
Exactly.
Right.
When reality knocks, the branding doesn't save you.
So let's get into it. We have to start in the Netherlands. It's a small country, but it is very often a bellwether for broader Western administrative trends.
Absolutely.
We're looking at the formation of the Jetten cabinet, led by Rob Jetten. It's a minority cabinet facing what they themselves call a year of truth. But before they could even get started, before the ink was even dry on the coalition agreement, they hit a massive speed bump.
A speed bump named Natalie van Berkel.
Right, Natalie van Berkel. She was intended to be the state secretary for finance. Now, for our listeners outside of Europe, let's just clarify the stakes here. This isn't some junior advisory role.
Not at all.
You're managing the nation's money. You are the fiscal conscience of the state. And then, just as the cabinet is forming, she suddenly resigns. And why? Because it turns out her CV was, well, a work of fiction.
Yeah, polished was the word used in the press, which is a very, very generous euphemism.
Just a little light polishing.
Right. She claimed to have degrees in public administration from Leiden University and Dutch law from Erasmus University.
And those are two of the most prestigious academic institutions in the country.
They are. And the reality, what was actually in her file, she had a propedeuse and a HVO diploma.
Okay, we need to translate that context for people outside the Dutch education system. What exactly is a propedeuse?
A propedeuse is basically a certificate for passing your first year of university. It's the freshman year.
This was not a degree.
It is absolutely not a degree. It's a pat on the back that says, good job, you started the program, and a HVO diploma is a secondary school qualification. So we are talking about someone who claimed to be a Master of Laws in Administration, who in reality had the academic credentials of a first-year dropout.
That is just, it's wild. But here is where it gets really interesting to me, based on the sources analysis. It's not just that she lied.
People lie all the time.
Right, people lie. We know that. It's that she held high-level executive positions for years. She was a top executive at the UWV, which is the employee insurance agency in the Netherlands.
A massive bureaucracy handling billions of euros.
Exactly. And she was high up in a D66 political party. How does someone function at that level for that long without the actual qualifications to back it up?
That is the crucial question. And it leads us directly to this concept from the source material of a diploma democracy and the bullshit economy. The analysts make a fascinating, honestly somewhat uncomfortable point here. If she could do the job, and apparently she functioned well enough that no one noticed she was a fraud for years, then what does that actually say about the job itself?
You're saying the job itself might be entirely hollow.
Exactly. It suggests that modern administration, especially at that high executive level, isn't really about technical skill anymore. It's not about deep knowledge. It's about presence. It's about identity.
It's about knowing the right jargon to use in the meeting?
Right. Sitting in meetings, projecting confidence, ticking the right boxes. It reflects a culture where manipulative behavior, essentially being able to sell yourself, is rewarded far over actual substance.
It's the fake it till you make it culture on steroids.
It really is.
But I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Yeah.
D66, her own party. Surely they knew. You don't get to be a state secretary nominee without an intense background check, do you?
One would think. But the sources point out that D66 likely knew, or at the very least, strongly suspected. But the system itself is complicit here. The discussion mentions the General Administrative Service, ABD.
What's that?
This is the elite group that fills the top government spots, and this is the truly shocking part. Apparently, for these top-tier jobs, they often don't even check diplomas.
Wait, hold on. If I apply for an entry-level job at that same employee insurance agency, or if I want to be a desk clerk at the local municipality, I have to upload a certified scan of my diploma.
Yeah.
I probably have to bring the original paper document to the HR interview.
Correct. But at the top, it's a club. It's a carousel. You know people. You fit the right profile. Maybe you check a diversity box or a gender balance box that the cabinet desperately needs to look modern, and you're just in.
Unbelievable.
It creates this closed loop of elites who trust each other's credentials without any verification. It is literally a class system where the rules of entry apply to the foot soldiers, but not to the generals.
It really reminds me of LinkedIn. You scroll through LinkedIn and everyone is a thought leader or a strategic visionary. The Force actually calls it an inflationary CV culture.
Yes, that's the perfect term. You take a 3-day online module from the Harvard Expansion School, and suddenly your profile says, educated at Harvard.
Right.
It's a society-wide inflation of credentials. We are just drowning in symbols of competence, while actual boots-on-the-ground competence is becoming increasingly rare. Natalie Van Berkel is just the extreme symptom of a disease we all have. We value the logo, the brand, the piece of paper, more than the ability to actually do the work.
And I just wonder about the psychology of it. Imagine sitting in those executive board meetings for 10 years, making massive financial decisions, and knowing you're a total fraud. Knowing that if anyone just picked up the phone and called the registrar at Leiden University, your entire life is over. That requires a very specific kind of personality.
It requires a personality that thrives on manipulation. And the source argues that our current political system actively selects for exactly that personality type.
The slick operator.
Yes, the person who can manage the narrative rather than manage the reality.
And while the political class is busy polishing their fake CVs and managing narratives, they're making actual decisions that have very real, very painful consequences for everyone else. Which brings us to the Jetten cabinet's actual policies. Because this isn't just about a lying politician, it's about where the money is actually going.
This is the pivot from the crisis of competence to the crisis of policy. The new cabinet is facing a harsh financial reality check, the year of truth, as they say. So to balance the books, they are proposing significant cuts to Social Security. They want to raise the retirement age even faster. And the big one, a sharp increase in the own risk, or the deductible, for healthcare.
The source material mentions it could go up to 520 euros. That is a massive amount of money for a low-income family.
It's crippling.
If you get sick, you have to pay the first 520 euros entirely out of pocket before insurance kicks in. That hurts. That's a grocery budget for an entire month for some people.
It hurts specifically the lower and middle classes. But here's the kicker that the source points out. Why did they need to cut Social Security? Why do they need to raise the healthcare deductible right now? It's not just general inflation.
It's to buy guns.
Effectively, yes. It is to fund a massive, sudden increase in defense spending, an extra 20 billion euros to meet the new NATO 5% norm.
And this brings us to a concept the expert in the source material focuses heavily on, which is depoliticization. Can you explain that? Because usually, spending an extra 20 billion euros is a huge, loud political debate. In a functioning democracy, you'd expect people to be screaming in parliament about this trade-off.
Normally, yes. In a healthy democracy, you would have a fierce debate. You'd say, do we want better healthcare or do we want more tanks? Do we value taking care of the elderly or do we value buying new artillery?
Right, that's what politics is.
Yeah.
Weighing priorities.
But depoliticization means the government frames the decision as if there is literally no choice at all. They say, we have to do this. It's a technical necessity imposed from the outside. The NATO norm says 5%. The Russians are coming. We have no choice.
So they take it entirely out of the realm of political choice, where citizens vote on their values and they make it a technocratic necessity, like gravity. You can't vote against gravity.
Exactly. It becomes a taboo to even question it. The source compares it to the corona crisis.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, during the pandemic, if you question the measures, you were immediately framed as dangerous or anti-science. Now, if you question the sudden explosion in defense spending, you're seen as naive or worse, a Putin sympathizer. The citizens are just expected to, as the Dutch phrase goes, sign at the cross.
It's the ultimate. There is no alternative argument. But the source material pushes back on this hard. They argue that true security architecture isn't just about throwing billions at military contractors for more missiles.
No, it requires a broader vision.
It requires diplomacy. It requires seriously thinking about how Europe is actually going to live with Russia in the 21st century. But that debate isn't happening. The big centrist parties, the VVD, PVDA, D66, they all just agree it's a uniparty on this specific issue.
And this depoliticization extends to migration, too.
Yeah.
The government points to the European Union and says, look, we have a European migration pact now. Brussels is solving the problem for us.
But the source analyzes this pact and basically calls it a paper tiger.
Because the return deals with third countries, places like Tunisia, Rwanda, Albania, to take people back aren't actually settled.
Right, they're just concepts.
It's all on paper. It's another facade. They present a neat bureaucratic solution to a messy, real-world problem, but the solution doesn't actually work on the ground. And honestly, nothing illustrates the absolute failure of the government to handle migration and security better than the story the source shares from Luckham.
Oh, man. This story blew my mind when I was reading the prep material. I literally had to reread the notes to make sure I wasn't hallucinating.
It's a perfect encapsulation of the era.
Let's set the scene for the listener. Lochem is a municipality in the Netherlands. Nice, quiet, standard provincial place. They're setting up a new asylum center there. And naturally, the neighbors are worried. They're worried about safety, noise, security. Whether those fears are statistically justified or not, they are very real fears for the people living there.
Right. It's a standard situation in this ongoing crisis. The government needs to place people, and the locals are anxious about the impact on their daily lives.
But the local government solution wasn't to promise extra police patrols. It wasn't to guarantee safety by securing the perimeter. Their solution was to offer the immediate neighbors a check for €1,000.
Specifically, to buy their own security cameras and heavier locks for their doors.
Just think about that for a second. The government, whose primary job, literally foundational definition of the state, is to maintain public order and hold a monopoly on violence, is going to the citizens and saying, we cannot guarantee your safety. So here is $1,000. Go to the hardware store and fortify your own house.
It is the ultimate admission of state failure. It is the literal privatization of public safety. They are effectively buying off the citizens' fear with cash.
It's purely transactional.
Completely transactional. They are saying, we are putting a potential risk next door to you, so here is the financial compensation for your heightened risk. It implies that the government knows full well they cannot control the environment. They know there are risks, and instead of managing those risks, they are outsourcing the defense of the home to the homeowner.
It's so dystopian. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I'm a neighbor in Lochem, and I'm genuinely worried, isn't €1,000 better than nothing? I mean, are you saying the money is actually an insult?
The source implies it's worse than an insult. It's a fundamental breach of the social contract. Think about it. We pay taxes so that the state keeps the streets safe. That's the deal. If the state hands me back a fraction of my tax money and says, keep yourself safe, then why does the state even exist?
That's a great point.
It dissolves the bond between citizen and government. It turns the citizen into a mercenary defending their own neighborhood.
It's the Lochem solution. Buy a lock, shut up, and don't ask complicated questions about the actual policy. And it connects perfectly back to that bullshit economy we talked about at the start. The policy is a transactional fix, not a structural solution. It's putting a tiny cheap Band-Aid on a compound fracture.
And this pervasive sense of abandonment, the feeling that the state is incompetent because they have fake CVs, that the state forces heavy financial costs on you with healthcare cuts, and that the state fundamentally can't protect you in places like Lochem. This is the exact soil in which radicalism grows.
Right.
which naturally takes us across the channel to the UK.
To restore Britain. This is a new political entity that is really shaking things up. And the face of it is a man named Rupert Lowe. Now, when I think of British populism, I usually think of Nigel Farage, holding a pint of beer in a pub, laughing loudly, looking like you just walked out of a rugby match.
The beer bike populist, as the source brilliantly calls him. Farage is noisy. He's a disruptor. He's the guy standing outside the gates of Parliament shouting at the establishment. But Rupert Lowe is something entirely different, and the source argues he is potentially much more significant.
He's described as a gentleman.
No.
An aristocrat.
Yes. If you look at the visual backdrop for his launch video, it wasn't a crowded, angry rally. It was a rural estate.
I saw that.
Imagine rolling green hills, a beautiful old manor house, tweed jackets. He has this very grounded, boots in the clay, traditional farming aesthetic. He speaks eloquently. He doesn't shout. He uses complex vocabulary, complaining about the proliferation of bureaucracy. He projects calm. He projects stability.
He looks like the kind of guy who would invite you into his study for a cup of Earl Grey tea,
Right.
and then calmly, politely explain why he's about to dismantle the entire modern government. It's a very, very different vibe from the angry, red-faced populist.
Exactly. And that aesthetic contrast is key to understanding his appeal. Farage looks like a rebel trying to tear things down. Lowe looks like the rightful heir returning to claim and repair his broken estate.
Right.
But his message, if you listen to the actual words, it is radical. It is next level, much harder than anything we see in the Netherlands right now, even from the furthest right parties like Forum for Democracy or Geert Wilders.
Yeah, the phrase that really stuck out to me from his speech was about remigration. He doesn't sugarcoat it. He explicitly says, if that means millions go, then millions go.
He doesn't mince words at all. And he lists the specific criteria for who goes, illegal immigrants, obviously, but also those who are unemployed or reliant on state benefits, those who fail to integrate, and this is the truly vague but incredibly powerful one, those who hate the British way of life.
Hate the British way of life. I mean, that is a
Yeah.
massively broad net to cast. Who defines that? Is it hating tea? Is it criticizing the king? Is it complaining about the weather or the government?
And that is exactly the danger the expert in the source material points out. It's legally diffuse, it's highly subjective, it allows for completely arbitrary enforcement by whoever is in power. But the reason it resonates so deeply is because of the reality of what the source calls the two Englands.
The two Englands. This was such a vivid comparison in the analysis. On one hand, you have Lowe's world, the rural, idyllic backdrop, the green hills, the farm, the shire, if you want to call it that.
A very nostalgic vision.
Right. But on the other hand, you have the grim reality of modern British cities. The Force mentions those urban exploration channels like Travel Maniac on YouTube that document places like Leeds or certain parts of East London.
And the analysts describe these urban areas as looking like Parisian banlieues. Rough, segregated, impoverished, parallel societies where the so-called British way of life that Lowe talks about has effectively vanished entirely. You watch these videos and you see rubbish piled in the streets, boarded up shops, a complete and total lack of social cohesion.
It's a stark contrast.
Lowe is tapping into a very deep, very real sense of loss among a large segment of the population. He is promising to restore a version of England that many feel has been stolen or actively erased by technocrats.
It's essentially make Britain great again, but wrapped in a tweed jacket instead of a red baseball cap. And crucially, he's framing it as a restoration of order, not a violent revolution, but practically speaking.
Right.
Say millions must go. How do you even execute a policy like that?
That is exactly where we hit the brick wall of international law. The source refers to this approach as enacted free politics.
What does that mean in this context?
It's the idea of bypassing everything. Bypassing the traditional media, bypassing what they call the fake news, bypassing the institutional gridlock of Parliament, and appealing directly to the people's raw desire for drastic, immediate action. He is setting a course for a direct, high-speed collision with international treaties on human rights. You cannot just deport millions of people because they are unemployed or because someone says they hate British life. The domestic courts will stop you. The European Court of Human Rights will stop you.
But I get the strong feeling Lowe knows that perfectly well.
He absolutely does, and his attitude seems to be, so be it, let them try to starve us. This is the ultimate political backlash to the Lockham solution we discussed earlier.
Explain the connection there.
Well, if the centrist government's only answer to your insecurity is to give you a €1,000 check to buy a lock and says we can't help you with the actual problem, Eventually, you are going to vote for the guy who says, I won't buy you a lock. I will just physically remove the people you are locking your door against.
Wow. Yeah.
It's the inevitable mathematical result of the political center failing to provide basic security. When the moderate solution is just to give up, the radical solution becomes, let's tear the whole system down.
So we have the domestic failure in the Netherlands, the fake polished competence of the political center. We have the radical populist backlash in the UK, the gentleman who wants to deport millions. Now, we need to zoom out, because while Europe is busy wrestling with its internal identity and broken social contracts, the global order is shifting in a way that might honestly make all of our domestic politics completely irrelevant. We need to talk about the Middle East, Iran, and the United States.
This is where the discussion gets terrifyingly technical. We often think of geopolitics as just leaders talking in grand rooms in Geneva or Washington. But historically, sometimes the entire world turns on a single piece of technology, a single invention that completely changes the math of war.
The setup here, according to the source, is that regional tensions are skyrocketing. The U.S. is building up a massive historic military presence in the Gulf. And the analysis suggests that Netanyahu in Israel might actively be trying to lure the U.S., and specifically, potentially a future Trump administration, into a direct, kinetic conflict with Iran.
Right, to secure his own political survival and eliminate a regional rival, that's the political and strategic layer. But the deeper question the source asks is the U.S. blindly walking into a catastrophic trap? We tend to think of the U.S. military as completely invincible. We watch the Hollywood movies, we see the Top Gun jets. But the source argues the U.S. is drastically, perhaps fatally underestimating Iran right now.
Because Iran isn't alone anymore. This isn't Iraq in 2003, where it was essentially isolated.
No, not at all. Iran is conducting massive joint naval drills with Russia and China. This isn't just a rogue state acting out. It's part of a highly coordinated new global axis. And economically, it's deeply tied. China relies on Iran for roughly 25% of its oil imports.
Just think about that number for a second.
It's massive. 1/4 of the energy that powers the entire Chinese industrial economy comes directly from Iran. China literally cannot afford for Iran to fall or be destroyed by American bombs. It is an existential, non-negotiable issue for Beijing.
So China has a massive vested interest in keeping the Iranian regime standing.
Right.
And China isn't just sending them thoughts and prayers in the UN. They're sending hardcore military tech. And this was the big aha moment for me when I was going through the source material.
Yeah.
The radar.
Yes. The source specifically mentions that China has installed a highly sophisticated new radar system inside Iran. The system is reportedly capable of detecting stealth aircraft from 1,000 kilometers away.
Wait, let's just pause and really absorb that. The whole point of American air superiority, the doctrine they've relied on since the Gulf War, is stealth. The F-35 fighters, the B-2 bombers, they're supposed to be completely invisible to enemy radar. That's why they win. You don't see them coming until the bomb drops. You're saying that entire strategic advantage is just gone.
According to this source, against this specific new Chinese technology, yes, it has to do with the physics of the wavelength. Traditional stealth geometry is designed to deflect very specific types of high-frequency radar waves. But this new Chinese system uses different bands, longer waves, that essentially allow it to see the physical disturbance in the air, regardless of the plane's radar-absorbent coating.
That's terrifying for the Pentagon.
If you can see the multi-billion-dollar stealth bomber coming from 1,000 kilometers away, it's not a stealth bomber anymore. It's just a very slow, very expensive target in the sky.
And it gets even worse for the U.S. Navy. The expert in the source material calls the aircraft carrier the superweapon of the 20th century.
To understand this, you have to think about the battleship. In 1939, the battleship was the undisputed king of the ocean. It was the ultimate projection of imperial power.
Right, giant guns, massive armor.
But by 1942, after Pearl Harbor and the Battle of Midway, the battleship was functionally obsolete because of the aircraft carrier. Planes could hit ships from hundreds of miles away. The source argues we are at that exact same historical tipping point right now. The aircraft carrier is the new battleship. It is big, it is incredibly impressive to look at, and it is fundamentally doomed.
Because of the new missiles.
Hypersonic missiles. The source references the recent use of the Russian Oreshnik missile, as well as the proliferation of modern drone swarms. These new hypersonic weapons travel at unimaginable speeds, Mach 5, Mach 10, even faster. They move so fast that traditional defense systems simply cannot track or intercept them in time. And unlike an old ballistic missile, they don't fly in a predictable mathematical arc. They can steer and maneuver in the atmosphere.
So if you park a massive, slow-moving aircraft carrier in the narrow waters of the Persian Gulf,
And Iran, fully backed by Russian targeting satellites and Chinese radar tech, launches a coordinated hypersonic missile swarm. That carrier is virtually defenseless. It is a multi-billion-dollar sitting duck with thousands of American sailors on board. We saw a preview of this recently. The Iron Dome in Israel, which is heavily hyped as impenetrable, was recently pierced by Iranian missiles.
that really shocked a lot of observers.
It proved the fundamental vulnerability of advanced missile defense systems against overwhelming numbers. If the U.S. moves its carriers too close to the Iranian coast, they risk the total destruction of their fleet.
And if they lose a carrier, I mean, that changes the whole world. That breaks the psychological dominance of American military power globally. It would be the end of an era in a single afternoon.
Exactly, and that is why this military buildup is so incredibly dangerous. If the U.S. attacks Iran, it's no longer just a punitive strike against Iran. It instantly becomes a proxy war against China and Russia, who are already heavily supplying and protecting Iran. It's the exact mirror image of how the West is supplying Ukraine to fight Russia. We are looking at a global powder keg where all the old assumptions, the idea that we have the carriers, therefore we win, might be dead wrong.
Speaking of Ukraine, the source material does touch on that conflict as well near the end of the discussion. And once again, they offer a view that heavily contradicts the mainstream Western narrative.
It does. If you read the standard Western papers or listen to the daily defense briefings, you constantly hear about stalemates. Or you hear about deep Russian incompetence or the imminent collapse of the Russian economy due to sanctions.
Right, that Putin is always on the ropes.
But the source argues that on the ground, the military reality is very different. Russia is slowly but steadily advancing. They are taking key towns like Pokrovsk. They're threatening major logistics hubs like Kostiantynivka. It's a grinding, brutal war of attrition, and Russia has the numbers.
And meanwhile, the leadership in Kyiv is practically fighting itself.
Yes. The analysts point to the reported public struggle between President Zelensky and his former top general, Zaluzhny. There are mutual accusations of corruption, of strategic failure, of mismanaging the draft. It paints a picture of a crumbling internal front, which contrasts sharply with the united Ukraine narrative we are so used to seeing in the media.
The source actually ends this entire section with a fascinating story about the nature of propaganda. They talk about a film called Mr. Nobody Against Putin. It's a documentary focusing on a simple Russian teacher.
It's a chilling scene to describe, but it's also absurdly funny in a very dark way. This local teacher is forced by the state to read these grand propaganda scripts to his students. The script is all about how gloriously the Russian army is doing, how they are liberating everyone from fascists.
And the students, how do they react?
They are just completely confused. They are looking at him like, "Sir, can we please just do the regular grammar lesson?" They know it's nonsense. He knows it's nonsense.
It just shows the total absurdity of it, the complete hollowness of the official narrative.
It does. And the expert in the source material uses this exact anecdote to make a much broader, more important point. Propaganda, whether it's forced Russian scripts in a provincial classroom, or Western media narratives about constantly winning in Ukraine, or Dutch politicians pretending a fake CV is real. It works for a while.
You can keep the illusion going.
You can twist the truth. You can maintain the polished facade. But eventually, reality snaps back. It always does. Eventually, the student realizes the teacher is lying. Eventually, the invincible aircraft carrier sinks. Eventually, the voter realizes the 1,000-euro check won't actually stop the crime in their neighborhood.
And when that system finally collapses, when the bullshit economy hits the immovable wall of reality, that's when things get truly dangerous.
That's when you get the Rupert Lows rising to power. That's when you get the massive global conflicts in the Gulf. Because the foundational trust is gone. The institutions that were supposed to manage reality for us have been exposed as entirely empty shells.
So we've covered an immense amount of ground today. We've gone from a lying state secretary in The Hague to a gentleman radical of the British countryside, all the way to a Chinese radar dish sitting in the Iranian desert. What is the ultimate thread connecting all of this for the listener?
It's the collapse of the technocratic illusion. We have spent the last 30 years in the West believing that experts and bureaucratic systems and international rules could just safely manage the world.
We thought we mastered history.
Exactly. We thought we could depoliticize war, manage the economy with neat spreadsheets, and ensure domestic security with financial payouts. We genuinely thought we could replace hard leadership with soft management.
But the experts have fake degrees. The international rules are ignored by the powerful, and the domestic security is just an illusion.
Precisely. The world is rapidly moving away from a rules-based order managed by polite technocrats. We are moving headfirst into a raw clash of spheres of influence and brutal hard power. It's a world where your polished CV doesn't matter at all, only your capacity to actually deliver, whether that's delivering safety to your citizens on the street or delivering a hypersonic payload to a naval target.
It's an incredibly sobering thought. We are stripping away the varnish today, and it leaves us with a very difficult question to ponder.
The defining question of where we go from here.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. We've talked extensively about hollow institutions today, from the government vetting process that somehow missed a fake high school diploma to the billion-dollar aircraft carrier that might actually just be a floating coffin. If the institutions we have implicitly trusted for decades are revealed to be obsolete or hollow, where do you place your trust in the coming years?
Do you look for the gentleman who promises to cleanly tear it all down?
Do you look to your local community to rebuild from scratch? Or do you just take the government check and buy a better lock for your front door? It's something to think about.
That is the question of the decade, and honestly, I don't think there is an easy answer.
Neither do I. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us today. We'll see you next time.